Hello everyone. Welcome to One More Thing. I'm Matt. Today we will explore a very challenging topic, things you don't know about people in 6 totalitarian countries. This video will take you deep into the truth about some totalitarian countries in the world, revealing the hidden facts and the conditions faced by the people of these countries. We hope that through this video, the audience will have a more comprehensive understanding of the political systems of these countries and the human rights and freedom issues behind them. Maybe you already have some basic knowledge of totalitarian states, but we'll dig deeper into what makes these countries unique and explore their social control, free speech, religious restrictions, and other important issues. Please know that we respect the dignity of governments and people and are committed to providing accurate and reliable information. Through this video, we hope to arouse the audience's attention to human rights and freedom, and encourage everyone to support relevant international organizations and initiatives. Let's embark on this journey of discovery together to understand the facts behind these totalitarian states and consider what contribution we can make to the global voice for freedom and justice. Let's get started now. The concept and characteristics of totalitarian states. A totalitarian state is a state in which a centralized government or individual holds absolute power. Under such a system, the government usually controls all aspects of the country, including politics, economy, society, and culture. The characteristics of these countries usually include the following aspects. Centralized power. The government of a totalitarian state has extremely concentrated power, usually with one leader or a small group holding the decision-making power. These leaders or groups often have extensive power and control and are able to suppress opposition through legal or other means. Political oppression. In totalitarian states, political oppression is widespread. Dissidents, political opponents, and social movements are often severely suppressed and persecuted. Governments may use a variety of means to restrict freedom of expression, assembly, and association to ensure absolute control over their authority. Economic control. Totalitarian states usually adopt coercive economic control measures, such as nationalization, planned economy, and price controls. The government may control economic resources and production means through state-owned enterprises or private enterprises under government control, and strictly regulate the market. Social control. A totalitarian state will exercise strict control over society to ensure influence on people's thoughts, behaviors, and values. This control can be achieved through means such as propaganda machines, educational systems, and religious restrictions. Governments may view propaganda as a tool to shape the country's image, promote its ideology, and maintain its power. Strict security measures. Totalitarian states often implement strict security measures to ensure regime stability and control of internal and external threats. This includes the establishment of a system of surveillance and surveillance, as well as a crackdown on opposition in the presence of a secret police. These characteristics make people in totalitarian countries face serious restrictions on human rights and freedoms. Fundamental freedoms such as freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of elections and equal rights are often seriously violated. Understanding the characteristics and facts behind totalitarian countries can help us better understand the political environment of these countries and the difficulties faced by the people. 1. China's social control and surveillance system. As a totalitarian country, China has a large and complex social control and surveillance system and imposes strict surveillance and restrictions on its citizens. The establishment of this system is achieved through technical means, legal measures and social management. First, the Chinese government uses a large-scale surveillance system to monitor citizens in real time. A large number of surveillance cameras are installed in cities and public places, and these cameras often have facial recognition and behavioral analysis functions. In addition, the government is promoting a real name system requirement, requiring citizens to use real identity information in internet and telecommunications services, further increasing the tracking and monitoring of personal activities. Second, the Chinese government has implemented strict online supervision and censorship. China has implemented the so-called Great Firewall that screens and blocks the internet, restricting citizens' access to specific websites and content. In addition, the government requires internet service providers and social media platforms to monitor users' speech and behavior and delete or block them according to the government's instructions. Furthermore, the Chinese government uses the social credit system to evaluate and monitor citizens' behavior. This system scores individuals based on their behavior and consumption habits, and rewards or punishes them based on the scores. Such a system enables the government to better understand the behavior of citizens and to restrict behavior that does not meet the government's expectations. Finally, the Chinese government shapes citizens' thoughts and values through a strict propaganda and education system. Textbooks and media are tightly controlled by the government to ensure that propaganda conforms to the government's ideology. In addition, the government monitors university campuses and restricts students' freedom of association and speech to ensure that the minds of the younger generation conform to the government's requirements. 2. North Korea's closure and propaganda machine. North Korea is one of the most closed countries in the world, with an extremely strict social control and propaganda machine. This closed system is dominated by the rule of the Workers' Party of Korea, Korean Party, and the authoritarian rule of the Kim family. First of all, the North Korean government has closed off its citizens through strict control and restrictions on national borders. North Korea's borders are tightly sealed, the entry of foreigners is strictly restricted, and it is difficult for citizens to leave the country freely. In addition, the government exercises strict control over the flow of information domestically and internationally, limiting citizens' access to external media and the internet. Secondly, the North Korean government has a powerful and sophisticated propaganda machine to shape the country's image and promote specific ideologies. The government controls all media outlets, including newspapers, television and radio stations, and all content is subject to strict government censorship and control. The propaganda machine typically portrays Kim Jong-un and his family as supreme leaders and national heroes, and promotes North Korea's self-reliance and resistance to hostile foreign forces. Furthermore, the North Korean government conducts large-scale ideological control and brainwashing education. The education system combines the family cult of the Kim family with the party's ideology and instills it in students and citizens. People are forced to participate in collective activities and political propaganda activities and must express unconditional support for leaders and governments. In addition, the government also implements strict control of speech and thought, suppressing and persecuting dissidents and political opponents. Finally, the North Korean government severely restricts citizens' freedom and private lives. Citizens' actions and speech are closely monitored, and any criticism or dissatisfaction with the government is considered counter-revolutionary. The government operates an extensive network of spies and whistleblowers on citizens to ensure that any potential opposition can be monitored and neutralized. 3. Free speech and electoral issues in Russia. Russia is a high-profile country that faces a range of issues and challenges around free speech and elections. Although Russia has a multi-party system and a constitution that guarantees citizens freedom of speech and right to vote, the actual situation shows many restrictions and injustices. First, freedom of expression in Russia is strictly monitored and restricted. The government exercises strict control over the media, and most major media outlets are controlled by the government or government-linked agencies, resulting in biased and limited news reporting. In addition, the government regulates the internet through laws and regulations, restricting internet freedom and citizens' freedom of expression on the internet. Secondly, Russia faces some problems in terms of elections. There was an uneven playing field in the electoral process, with the government interfering in the elections and suppressing and persecuting opposition and political opponents. Many international observers and human rights groups pointed to instances of electoral fraud, suppression of opposition voices and restrictions on competition. In addition, the Russian government has imposed restrictions and suppression on civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations. Many independent NGOs are considered hostile forces and subject to government surveillance and suppression. This restriction on civil society reduces the ability of citizens to participate in political and social affairs. Despite these challenges and problems in Russia, there are also many people working hard to fight for free speech and democratic values. Civil society organizations, independent media and human rights defenders play an important role in promoting freedom of expression and electoral integrity. The international community has also expressed concern about the human rights situation and democratic issues in Russia, calling on the Russian government to improve the environment for freedom of speech, ensure election fairness, and respect human rights. Overall, Russia faces a range of challenges to free speech and elections, including regulation of speech, electoral injustice, and restrictions on civil society. However, continued efforts and international attention have helped push Russia in a more open and democratic direction. 4. Women's rights and religious restrictions in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a country where Islam is the state religion, and women's rights are restricted by religious and traditional values. Despite some reforms in recent years, Saudi women still face severe restrictions and unequal treatment in many areas. First, Saudi Arabia has a strict gender segregation system. Women are restricted in public places and social life and are required to adhere to strict dress codes, including wearing traditional robes and headscarves. In addition, social interaction between men and women is also restricted, and women are required to travel with relatives or legal guardians in public places and to be supervised by men. Second, Saudi Arabian women face challenges in employment and education. Although women have gained more educational opportunities in recent years, there are still problems of limited employment opportunities and restricted career development. Many industries remain closed to women, and when it comes to marriage and family, traditional values emphasize women's role in the home, limiting their autonomy and financial independence. Additionally, women in Saudi Arabia have limited freedom of movement and travel. Under the country's guardianship system, women need permission from a relative or legal guardian to travel or leave the country. This restriction has a great impact on women's independence and autonomy, limiting their ability to participate in international affairs and explore the outside world. However, in recent years, the Saudi Arabian government has begun to implement a series of reform measures to improve the status and rights of women. For example, women are allowed to drive cars and their participation in certain career fields has increased. In addition, the government has promoted education reforms and encouraged women's participation in the workplace. These reform initiatives are aimed at realizing Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 to promote social and economic modernization. Overall, women's rights in Saudi Arabia are limited by religious and traditional values. However, as reforms advance, women's status and rights in Saudi Arabian society are changing. These reforms are an important step towards modernizing society and improving gender equality in the country, but continued efforts are still needed to ensure that women can enjoy greater rights and autonomy. 5. Government control and economic woes in Cuba. Cuba is a country based on a socialist system, and its government exercises a high degree of control over national affairs and the economy, which has led to a series of challenges and economic difficulties. Although Cuba has made some achievements in areas such as education and health care, its government control and economic restrictions have had a significant impact on people's lives and development. First, Cuba's government tightly controls the country's political and social life. Political parties and the media are subject to government regulation, and freedom of expression and the rights of association are restricted. The government was less tolerant of criticism and dissent, suppressing the voices of political opponents and human rights activists. This government control has a negative impact on citizen participation and democratic development. Second, Cuba's economy faces difficulties and constraints. The country implements collective ownership and a planned economy, and most of the production resources are controlled by the government. This centralized economic system has led to low efficiency, insufficient innovation and the lack of a market economy. In addition, Cuba faces difficulties due to domestic and foreign trade restrictions and economic sanctions. Together, these factors have led to economic stagnation and a decline in people's living standards. In response to these challenges, the Cuban government has introduced some reform measures. For example, some private enterprises and foreign investment were opened to encourage the development of a market economy. In addition, the government has also promoted the development of tourism to increase foreign exchange earnings. These reform measures have improved economic conditions to a certain extent and provided some employment opportunities. However, Cuba's economic reform still faces many difficulties and challenges. The government's reform process is relatively slow, and the development of the market economy and private enterprise is still restricted and regulated. In addition, the inequality and social divisions brought about by economic reforms are also an important issue. Overall, Cuba's government control and economic woes have had a negative impact on people's lives and development. Although the government has begun to implement some reforms, greater efforts are still needed to achieve economic and political openness to promote the country's sustainable development and people's well-being. 6. Religious extremism and human rights issues in Iran. Iran is a country dominated by Islamic sects, but its religious extremism and human rights issues have attracted the attention of the international community. The Iranian government's religious control and enforcement of strict Islamic law have resulted in severe restrictions on human rights and personal freedoms. First, religious extremism in Iran has had far-reaching social and political consequences. Islamist laws and norms dominate the country's legal system, and religious leaders play an important role in political decision-making. This religious control limits freedom of expression, belief, and association, and imposes strict surveillance and persecution of dissidents, the news media, and religious minorities. Secondly, the human rights situation in Iran has attracted widespread attention. The government imposed a severe crackdown on political opponents, human rights activists, and journalists, with arrests, detentions, and torture becoming the norm. Free speech was restricted, and the government imposed tight surveillance and censorship on the internet and social media. Additionally, Iran's judicial system has been accused of lacking independence and committing human rights abuses, including unfair trials of political prisoners and widespread use of the death penalty. Concerns have also been raised over the Iranian government's restrictions on women. Family and marital laws such as marriage, divorce, custody and inheritance rights are heavily biased in favor of men and limit women's rights and autonomy. Women also face unequal treatment and restrictions in employment and education, including restrictions on career choices and strict norms for women in public spaces. However, it is worth mentioning that Iranian society is not a single voice. A segment of the Iranian people is dissatisfied with government control and restrictions and actively strives for human rights and political reform. Some reformist politicians and social movements are also pushing for reforms to human rights and religious freedom. However, the government's crackdown on opposition and protests remains a real challenge. Overall, religious extremism and human rights issues in Iran pose a serious threat to people's freedoms and rights. The international community should continue to pay attention to the human rights situation in Iran and urge the Iranian government to carry out reforms that respect human rights, freedom of speech and religious diversity in order to achieve a freer and more inclusive society. In this article, we explore government control and economic woes in Cuba, as well as religious extremism and human rights issues in Iran. These topics all involve core issues of national governance, personal freedoms and human rights, and have had a profound impact on the lives and development of local people. In the face of these challenges, each of us has a role to play. As viewers, we should continue to pay attention to and understand these issues, and express our support for the affected people by supporting relevant human rights organizations and international initiatives. We can raise awareness, share information and draw public attention to these issues through social media and other platforms. In addition, the government and the international community should also strengthen their efforts to promote dialogue and cooperation with countries such as Cuba and Iran to promote political and economic reforms and improve people's living conditions and human rights conditions. Above all, we should firmly believe that everyone deserves basic human rights and freedoms, no matter where they live. Only through the cooperation and efforts of the international community can we achieve a freer, more just and more inclusive world. Let us work together to achieve these goals. Please like, subscribe and sharing. We will bring you more valuable videos. See you next time.